You may have seen the title of the talk, and it is that we are back to the 5th century BC. Our times, the times we're in, are very similar to the 5th century BC, the time of the Buddha. And in fact, it's very similar to the entire world at that time. Our entire world is in a state of change and a loss of continuity with many centuries, even thousands of years of established ideas about the world and people and the universe. So you can see it, that it's unraveling. And this is very similar to the time of the Buddha. Basically, ways of life that have persisted for about 7,000 years, right back to the Bronze Age, we're starting to be irrelevant. In the 5th century BC, you see a tremendous amount of change in the world. New ways of thinking and conceptions of society, how we interact with each other, the responsibilities of the individual, new explorations about the human mind and what humans are supposed to be doing, how they should interact with each other and the world, were coming into existence. And in the West, the Western world is primarily influenced by the Greek philosophers of that time as well. So the 5th century BC is the time of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And the types of thoughts that they had are still playing themselves out. They had to figure out, they weren't living in little tribes anymore. They weren't living in little villages of 150 people hunting and gathering. A new way, a new kind of life was there, and they were becoming aware of larger world as well. So they had to rethink everything. And this was happening throughout all of the Asian continent and in India as well. The Buddha is, first of all, doing something very radical. He's leaving a very comfortable palace and a very organized, established life. Very strange, he's dropping out. This reminds me of the 60s, dropping out, going wandering, and the reason for going wandering as well. Because the ideas that had sustained previous generations were just losing their cogency, their validity. By the way, a lot of the backpackers who are wandering around India were reading a book in their, what was the book that was stuck in the backpacks of American hippies? By the way, why were American hippies wandering around in Asia in the 60s? Because money. First time, the wealthiest generation, the largest generation, and the wealthiest generation in the history of the planet had appeared. And they're called boomers. I'm a boomer. And some of you, I suspect, are boomers as well. And so that's a major event in history. And so for the first time, huge numbers of people from working class families or maybe middle class families had enough money to go wandering around the world. And that's a very strange thing. But also they had to confront the fact that the way previous generations lived was not all that meaningful or relevant to them. So they went looking. So that's why they were wandering around. They went looking for something. So the Buddha is like that too. He's from a very wealthy family. Wealth and education and entitlement, but he's not finding validity in the ideas that were around him. It didn't answer his existential questions. So by the way, what was that book that was in the backpacks of the boomers, the hippie boomers? Put up your hand if you know what that book is. Yeah, Siddhartha. It was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, a German writer. It's a novel, of course, but even that, and Hermann Hesse is from an even earlier generation of Europeans who were also in the midst of being lost because Europe was losing its vision, European civilization. And that started happening probably in the 17th century or 16th century, because new things are happening then. What are those new things that are happening? The new things are the questioning of Christianity and the order of kings and the idea of science and technology. So that's entering into society, and it's causing fractures and loss of vision. And so that changed everything, these new ideas. And these new ideas, by the way, are not sure ideas. They're not certain. They haven't been tested out. So we don't know what's going to happen. And so those new ideas begin to unfold. And we have then humans are in a universe that they're not absolutely confident about. They don't have a confident structure. And they have to think for themselves, and they have to make new innovations. And so you start to get unraveling of things. Of course, sometimes in a very positive direction. Not every unraveling is in a negative direction, but it's having to sort out and select among new ideas. So that in European history is the beginning of what's called the Enlightenment. And it's we use this word enlightenment only for an individual. An individual becomes enlightened. And we have a very specific meaning attached to this, enlightenment. And in the Buddhist, I don't see any other tradition that has such a clear and precise definitions of what this meant by this idea of enlightenment in an individual. We have very clear, precise descriptions of the stages which a human can go through. And these are more or less supernormal maturity. We all understand in general the stages of maturity that children go through, from being babies into being toddlers, into early childhood, then into the teen years and into the 20s and so forth. We kind of have a sense of this human process, which we see all the time. And of course, as if you've gone through it yourselves, and we become eventually, hopefully, mature, where we are fully grown in body and in brain, maybe sometime around, they say around 25 years old. I know your brain is supposed to be all wired up now. And behavior changes in those stages. And those are quite well studied and articulated by psychologists and philosophers over time. We all, of course, see even just our own observations of children growing up and having done that ourselves. We know about that. But what is called enlightenment is actually, can you keep going beyond what is called normal maturity, functional maturity? Is there something beyond that? So that's what enlightenment is continuing to develop and maturing in your vision and understanding of reality and the operating system of your own emotional structures. That is what is meant by enlightenment, and the structures which are impediments to that. Why don't we all just naturally become enlightened? Why don't we just keep growing after a certain stage and just become enlightened naturally? It's because it requires special efforts and education to do that. And it's something that the Buddha is personally discovering. It was not known at the time that the stages, how to progress beyond the normal stages of development of a human, and to refine that and develop that. It's almost like the types of technological and scientific discoveries that have been made since about the 16th century. It requires a different kind of thinking. And when you harness that kind of thinking, you get very interesting, spectacular results. You get, as we see in this world, here we are talking. I'm seeing all these faces all over the world, and we're talking at a distance, live. It's amazing. This is the result of some sort of elaborate system of thought which had not been used before, and it gives startling results. So the process that the Buddha is involved in is also like that. It gives startling results, but it's not technological or scientific, but it's directly verifiable by one's own experience. And after his own inquiry and his own discovery of this and his own experience of this, he begins to share it. He's obviously an exceptional person. And this initiates a transformation. And he's doing it, it's very timely, because the system that he explores, he's a very curious person. He's looking for something better, but he doesn't know what that better is, by the way. So before he is the Buddha, he's called the Bodhisattva, and he's an enlightenment seeker. He's seeking understanding, but he doesn't already know what that is. He's casting about, and in fact, he experiments with a number of different systems, because there are a number of different teachings available. He calls that the forest of views. There's an entire forest that he has to wander into. He literally wanders into the forests of India in the 5th century BC. And by the way, the forests in the world are still pretty big and impressive. We're in the middle of a forest where animals, every week there's some sort of bear or deer or moose or mountain lions and bobcats and all kinds of things wandering through this monastery. But in the 5th century BC, it's full of predatory animals, snakes, and all of this kind of stuff. The Buddha is entering into this forest, and the forest is a very, very overwhelming and unknown experience. Why is he going in there? He's going into this place which is unknown and dangerous, in order to inquire, to seek wisdom, to seek answers to his questions. And then he leaves you, he opens the Pali Canon with a sutta. And this sutta is called, this is the beginning, this is in the longer length sayings, is the first collection of the Pali Canon. The first sutta in there is the all-embracing net of views. So he starts out with showing you how many ways there are of looking at the world, how many ideas, theories, and psychological and religious views there are. He tries to enumerate them, and he comes up with 62 views to give you a good survey, kind of like World Philosophy and Religion 101, 62 types of views in the world. He says that this is what a human faces. Every human has to find their way through for themselves. They can't It's not just given to them. And this is a forest of views. It's full of unknowns, and it's full of possibly dangerous ideas, and it's full of confused ideas, and it's full of some positive ideas as well. But it's a forest of views. And this is what he is emphasizing, is that he's feeling himself as a moment in human history, a very important moment in human history, where old ways of doing things, none of the old ways of doing things have succeeded. They all have problems. They don't answer his ultimate questions. And this is very similar to the time we're living in right now. You can see that all of the things that sustained European civilization, in other words, Christianity, have declined and are fading out, and new forms of thought have been experimented with. So you have revolutions taking place. So the French Revolution, they systematically went and took nuns and monks and priests from the monasteries and put them under the guillotine. They also put royalty into the guillotine. They were going to have a new vision of life. It's democracy, it's fraternity, it's liberty. But it very soon turned into a slaughter, a strange slaughter. Everybody was under the guillotine. So it is new thoughts. It's all very well to critique the old, but new thoughts have to be brought in, and sometimes they turn out to be very difficult and dangerous. And this puts everybody into anxiety, uncertainty, fear. And that was just the beginning of things. So you see this is happening. Of course, this is happening in North America as well. Where is the revolution in North America? It's the United States, isn't it? They're having the American Revolution. They're getting rid of the king. They're getting rid of royalty. And they are getting rid of some of the forms of religion as well, and striding out into a brave new world. And they're making up the new, how are we going to live? So they're deciding new ways. And this is going on now for 250 years. Canada was a colony. We didn't do the radical revolution thing, but we're now on our own. We're in a loose association. We're trying to figure it out as well. And then you had this gigantic thing called the Marxist Revolution, which swept through Europe. And it was a total rejection of all prior values. And that's of course, the theme in China as well. So China threw out one of the largest Buddhist civilizations in the world, eliminated it, and tried on Marxism. And this is all approximately within our lifetimes, or the lifetimes of the boomers, and that previous generation. So huge radical changes are happening in this world. You add in science and technology into that, and radical transformations of ordinary life in every dimension. And then throw in because Christianity has lost its power and authority, also the structure of families. And because of the increase of population and so forth, then we see the size of families diminishing, reducing, and then, especially in the most recent times, you see people deciding not to have children at all. So abandoning the idea of even a family. You see this happening. This is extremely radical. This kind of change is very fast and happening throughout the world. And it's being accelerated also by this very medium that we're using right now, to a very good purpose, by the way. This use of, to be able to talk like this and to meditate together and to support each other through this medium is a beautiful use of this medium. And of course, specifically in this time of what's the pandemic. So, by the way, so let's throw in the pandemic and a new potential war that's happening in Russia and Ukraine. We haven't had an invasion in Europe since the Second World War. Now we have that as well. So, welcome to radical change and a complete incoherence of vision. And this is not just, in the West, it's throughout the world. China, of course, there's all kinds of issues with the countries that are surrounding it. So these are new ideas, new ideologies. We have at least one person here who's in Bangkok right now, who's Thai. And in that country, when I went there in 1991, I was extremely impressed by the level of respect for the Sangha and the system of monasteries, the training, and the demeanor of people in relationship to this was just remarkable. They also had a very polite and reverential attitude towards the monarchy, the king. And even in Thailand now, you can see this beginning to unravel. There's lots of new ideas coming in and a questioning of all of these values and structures. So this is similar to the 5th century BC. And this is what the Buddha had to face, that former ways of being and doing and thinking were stagnant and inadequate. A new world had dawned. And he didn't have to, he actually solved the issue himself personally, but he did, out of compassion, offer to explain it to others who are willing to listen. And by the way, he wasn't really a social or political leader. He didn't try to organize society. You don't find Buddhism imposing laws or rules on society. You'll find other religions that attempt to embody their ideas in the law of the land. Buddhism doesn't do that. It has precepts which the individual takes up on their own personal responsibility without any coercion and no lawful demands. So we don't have laws about who you can marry or who you can't marry. We don't try to convince the government to pass a bunch of laws that accord with the precepts. So it's a very different way of persuading people. So that's also something that we can consider in terms of how to go about dealing with change and uncertainty, is that it really is very much from the individual outwards. And you can't force a society to be enlightened. You can't make rules that force this. So the Buddha starts from the individual and says that if we can develop our precepts and some positive qualities of personality and human happiness, especially in the midst of chaos and change, this is appealing to others. And basically, there is no other way. It would be nice if we could just have some formula for organizing society where everybody was suddenly well and happy and peaceful, but it can't be done from externals. And many people believe that it can. So this is the history of political systems and new social structures trying to fix everything. But until you fix the inner life of people, until you understand the inner life of humans, then you will have systems which cannot externally fix the situation. So many of the attempts in world history to produce a utopian society or even a better society sometimes fail because the individual is not taken care of, not given instruction, not told the skills of well-being and happiness. And we look at our situation. We are in this situation. Now, many of you are long-term practitioners of Dhamma, and you are educating yourself and training yourself in this. And you will have a much better time of this than so many people. Now, one of the things you can see in the news again and again and in all kinds of reports is growing anxiety. In fact, the 20th century itself was called the age of anxiety by many psychologists, psychiatrists, and sociologists. They called the entire 20th century the age of anxiety because all kinds of things were falling apart, new ideas, you couldn't keep up with it, the change, nothing was stable. You just got used to one thing and it was wiped out, and all kinds of effects on the individual, being propelled into new and uncertain situations, anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. This is even exacerbated in this time. So it's even higher. So you're seeing, especially amongst younger people, young people, maybe less than 30 years old or less than 40 years old, they report high levels of anxiety, fear, and lack of mental health, emotional well-being. So you can see that they're kind of the canaries in the coal mine. The younger people, they will be experiencing this very directly. And so what can you offer them? Can you offer them a kind of a personal solution in this time? And yes, we can, and individuals can, by discovering that can you be well, happy, and peaceful in the midst of this pandemics and wars and environmental crises and the uncertainty of technology, science, and multiple levels of the effects of technology and the economics of this, what happens. You perhaps have seen that this wonderful generation called the boomers who had lots of money, the next generation after that had a little less, and the next generation had a little less. There's something strange going on. In the first time in history, a large section of the middle class and the working class actually had some money. And that appears to be over now. There's a decline in the certainty, so everybody has to have 2 jobs and they're not making enough money and all this kind of stuff. So all of these things are happening at the same time. Radical change. And to try to solve all of those issues by some sort of master plan of social arrangements, and I know this computer will fix all of that and we'll get robots and whether these are all kind of ideas that people have. They're trying to fix this situation like that. And maybe some of those things will help, and maybe some of them will just be a wrench in the machine, make things worse. Who knows? Do you have a strategy for this? Because this is the same as the 5th century BC. The total forest of views, all kinds of proposals. By the way, I'm quite interested in the history of the Asia's interaction with the West, especially in the 5th century, 4th century, 3rd century, etc. What happened in India, by the way, just after the Buddha? Greeks invaded India. So you have the Greek Empire sweeping across and invading India. So they have to deal with not only the situation of how to arrange a philosophy of the world, which is not in accord with the traditions that have been around for 1,000 years, and also the abrupt arrival of a totally different way of thinking from Greece. So Alexander the Great invaded northern India. This is a fascinating time, the 5th century BC, a fascinating time, and the greatest thinkers and one of the greatest attitude revolutions have come out of that time. So you have the Buddha in India. You have Socrates and Aristotle and Plato in Greece. And these ideas are still rippling out through time. And you have Lao Tzu and Confucius in China at the same time. This is amazing. This is a world revolution without internet. How does this happen? How is this consciousness changing, happening, radical consciousness changing, new ideas, etc. And it's still informing us to this day. We're still talking about Plato's ideas about organizing democracy and so forth. We're still functioning on those models. We're still, of course, talking right now, 2,500 years ago, all of this is the coherence of the Buddha's formula for how to approach the world, which is endlessly weaving in chaos. New ideas coming in all the time. So the Buddhism and its structures and attitude are perfect for this time. This is the 5th century. The 5th century has just been replaying itself over and over and over. It seems to replay itself now instead of taking a century, it takes about 20 years. A century goes by in 20 years. Maybe in the next, it'll soon be a decade, and then down to 5 years. It's very rapid changes. New ideas circulating, new technology circulating, new political structures circulating all the time. And yet, something that was a kind of a central idea formulated by the Buddha, the 5th century BC, is able to handle this very well. What do I mean by able to handle it? I mean that it's the individual that is able to handle it. You'll find out if the Buddha's ideas work. As you take up and train yourself in them, you'll find out if they work in this time. In the midst of the pandemics, in the midst of the economic collapses, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of vast growth, in the midst of ecological uncertainties, in the midst of space travel, in the midst of potential wars, in the midst of a nuclear age where, by the way, as I believe I heard yesterday or so, that somebody had unfortunately shelled a nuclear power plant. Now that's a very unfortunate incident. That could be very dangerous. In the midst of this, how do you feel? How do you feel? If you're practicing and if you're internalizing Dhamma and you're understanding the right attitude, you'll feel just fine. You will be okay. And what you generate towards the world will be towards kindness and peace and the enhancement of human well-being, and not only human well-being, animal well-being, and the well-being of nature and all of the complexities that revolve around nature. That is the attitude that is fostered. And we will be like this and think like this no matter what the situation is, because it's always the best attitude to have. It works under all circumstances, and it is in fact divorced from circumstances. It's called unconditional. And that's why when I do the guided meditation, the first thing I told you in the guided meditation was, you can find your sense of joy and ease, and it has nothing to do with the situation of the world. It has nothing to do with the situation of your personal life. It has nothing to do with your physical or medical situation either. That lightness that luminosity of mind can be found, and I would call that's called home. You know, I think it was, who was it? One of the poets, Robert Frost, he said, "What is home? Home is the place where when you gotta go there, they gotta take you. That's home." Is there actually a place in the world? I mean, yes, if you have the right kind of family is when you know, nothing works, they'll take you. You got to go there. But that isn't good enough. There's got to be a home where it's unconditional acceptance. It's got to be available to you when you got to go there. And sometimes when you got to go there when you're near death. You got to go there when nobody's going to take you in. I mean, that's the situation in the world now. Who's going to take the 2 million Ukrainian immigrants? You're going to take them into your home? How about the Syrians and the this and the that? Which one after another, after another, after another? Are there enough homes for it? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's called homeless. You see it now. It's a modern phenomena, homelessness all over the streets of the wealthiest cities on the planet. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Vancouver is a homeless. There are homeless people. There's no home for them. They got to go somewhere, but nobody's going to take them in. They don't have a home. But the Dhamma, the understanding and the training of the mind is to find the place where when you got to go there, it's got to take you. Dhamma is the place. So what are monks called? How did the Buddha define the monk? Homeless. We are supposed to go and deliberately be homeless. We are to leave the household life and go into the homeless life. We're supposed to realize that we are actually homeless, and we're supposed to find our way to a home that is outside of worldly conditions. We find ourselves to a refuge. So this is when the Buddha talks about refuges, we took the 3 refuges: the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. There's a nice phrase in the Dhammapada. They go to many a refuge. They go to the forest. They go to sacred shrines. But that is not a refuge. Those sacred shrines get blown up. The forests get cut down. There are no refuges outside. There are no sacred places that are untouchable. The refuges are to be found in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and that translates into us. The Buddha is to be found within you, the Dhamma is to be found within you, the Sangha is to be found within you, and only when you find them within you do they appear. And then you're in a relationship with the Sangha. The Sangha is those who have taken refuge. And this is what it is to be a Buddhist, is to take refuge. The Buddha, he was very interested in bringing people beyond his personality, his own personal experience. And the Buddha image that we have in our monastery is not we have a statue, we have this Buddha image statues and so forth, but we have a large painting in our sala, which is 8 feet tall, and I had it painted. And the title of this painting is called "Where is the Buddha Now?" And all it is an outline of a Buddha image. And there's no face, there's no robes, no nothing, you recognize it's a Buddha image, but it's just the absence of the Buddha. Where is the Buddha now? Where is this Buddha that you take refuge in? Which Buddha are you taking refuge in? Is it a stone statue? No, I hope not. You saw in Afghanistan when the Islamic armies took over and they shelled gigantic Buddha images that were carved into the cliffs in Afghanistan. By the way, so Afghanistan at one point was it was a Buddhist homeland. We quite often, we don't realize this, that Buddhism was a significant religious feature of the Middle East, long before Islam, long before Christianity. And there were gigantic Buddha images and monasteries and so forth throughout there. But if you take refuge in a monastery or a Buddha image, it's very easy to just get rid of those. That's what happened in China as well. As soon as the revolution comes in, they just wipe all of this stuff out. So that's not where the Buddha is. But where is the Buddha? So the Buddha was very insistent that you cannot, somebody came to see the Buddha and he said, why are you here? He said, I'm here to see you. He says, well, you can't see me even while I'm alive, let alone after I die. You can't see me while I'm standing in front of you. You can't see the Buddha. But if you see Dhamma, then you see the Buddha. And when you see the Buddha, you see Dhamma. So the Buddha is not a person, is not a personality. He is it's almost like mathematics. When you see mathematics, you don't need a mathematician. You don't need to see Einstein to see relativity. When you see relativity, you see Einstein's mind. You see it. So this is the refuge that we take and we find our way, and it's secure in all situations. And that's why he worked it out. He didn't want anything that was less than completely unconditioned. And that's the definition of this word nibbana, the unconditioned. And it means, nibbana means that it is stable, safe, and untouchable in all circumstances. So this is a vision that one develops and cultivates within oneself. And it can't be given to you by a society around you, a structure around you. It can only be cultivated by the individual and must be cultivated by the individual and cannot be given to anybody else. I can't just transfer it to you. Nobody can transfer it to another. It's by understanding that it occurs. But all we can do is be helpful. We can keep pointing and suggesting and reviewing and encouraging each other to continue on the path and invest in our personal stability, our personal freedom. Now, this type of freedom is not that, it's not like the freedom to run around doing what we want. That's not freedom. The types of freedom that people talk about are often just lack of discipline. They're just acting on impulse. That's not freedom. Freedom is the freedom to create your own well-being and emotion. You are free only when you are well. When you are happy and peaceful, you are free. When you're not free. The outside world and activities and relationships to the outside world can never be called freedom. It's not freedom. You haven't solved the main issue, which imprisons you, so that must go. And that door can only be unlocked from within. You are the only one that can find the key and unlock it and set yourself free. It's not freedom to do a bunch of things. It's freedom which comes from discipline, but eventually understanding and wisdom. And this is where freedom comes out and is the ultimate experience of human life. It is the ultimate reward and experience of human life. And anything short of that is not enlightenment. It's a human experience that is experienced while one is alive, walking around, and is the ultimate goal and aspiration for a human. So this is something that will allow you all, and one of the problems here is that I don't see very many 18-year-olds here. This is stuff good for 18-year-olds. You know, they're facing a world that is really very sketchy and hard to figure out. And I occasionally talk to them and so forth. I was at, because we were under evacuation, here's another situation. We were this monastery was evacuated because of a fire. And we ended up at this ski resort, and which turned out all right because we had a high-speed internet, so we could do a Dhamma talk, a live stream. But at the place we were at, there was a family, Kamloops family, and they had a young son who was a very bright young guy. He was about 14 years old. And we invited him to come to this live stream and ask a question if he wanted to. His mother came, and he came, and his mother actually asked a question, but he was a bit too shy. He's a very bright kid. But afterwards, he did ask me a question. And he asked me a question with some genuine despair, I think, in his voice. And that was, here's the question he asked me: how do you know what's true? He's facing the gigantic universe of the internet and every possible opinion and coming towards him at warp speed. And he's thinking, and this kid is bright, very, very bright. He's a classical pianist. He's winning the Kiwanis festivals. He's doing very well at school. His daddy's a doctor and so forth. And he's bright enough to be confused by the number of choices he's being handed and the information he's being offered. It's a blizzard. And for that generation, it's a blizzard of things. How do you know what's true? So this is what the Bodhisattva, he's stepping out into this forest of views. He's thinking, this guy says that guy says that, this guy says that. How do I know what's true? So he actually had to go and find, and that boy will be hiking around with a copy of Siddhartha in his backpack as well. So each person has to find out, they're confronted with this. It's an unfiltered world with vast numbers of competing viewpoints. How do you know what's true? So this is why, in fact, we come to it through the first thing we do here is cultivate this meditative possibility in order to shut down the excessive thinking processes in the mind. Because you can go through, you can get a doctorate in philosophy and come out the other side just as absolutely confused, because the conceptual proliferation mind is not where the solution happens. And there's a special way of using your mind, and that's that meditative way, that reducing the conceptual proliferation before evaluating what is true, because you're going to start to experience an emotional verification. You're going to start to feel an emotional verification of what is meant by truth. And even this word truth, the word for truth in the Buddhist structure is satcha, but also Dhamma. So it's something that is a truth that you feel throughout your whole emotive body. The truth is felt not as a concept. It's not a mathematical truth or scientific truth, but a whole emotional, mental experience which verifies itself, which authenticates itself. So this is the great good fortune we have of having recovered this teaching of the Buddha. And I mean, Westerners have had to go and uncover this. And even in Asia, where there are thousands of monks, quite often there have been interruptions and revisions and so forth. So the search for the authentic voice of the Buddha, the authentic Dhamma, the core teachings, the Eightfold Path and so forth, and meditation itself is something that needs to be done every generation. And the Buddha said that you need to go and rediscover the Dhamma each generation, authenticate it, and there'll be a tendency, as he predicted, there's an ongoing tendency for it to slip away and to be carried away and to be spun and so forth. So we always have to go back and find our way back to the core teachings, and we verify it through how it cures us, how it aids us, how it allows us to navigate without fear, with positive goodwill, in the midst of this whatever world we find ourselves in, whatever social situation we find ourselves in. And that's whether it's being authentically found, whether you found Dhamma authentically is just to the degree that it supports you, sustains you. So I don't know how long I've been talking. I have no idea, but I presume that's enough. So I will leave that for now. We can return now from the 5th century BC. We're back here now.